as I understand it, we do expect online Katie Crystal from Arlington. Jeff, I know you're here because I can see you. Senator Boysko, always welcome. Mary Hines, I think, is going to be with us today, though I've not seen her yet. Delegate Rome, I'm told, plans to be with us as well. There's Katie. Hi, Katie. And Mayor Michelle from Manassas Park is it's great. It's great. It's a good day. It hasn't started raining yet, so that's good. Mayor Michelle is with us from Manassas Park. In fact, here at the NBTA. And Mary Hines, I think I see you there as well, walking around your home. And at least the background is changing quickly. Again, let me call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order. I would like to move one item up very quickly. It is item 3. It's a resolution finding the need to conduct the September 17th Finance Committee meeting electronically, and I'd sure like to have a motion and a second with regard to that.
Hal, this is Katie. I'm happy to move, although it would help me a lot if those who are in the room with you could mute. I've got a real echo.
Okay, very good. I will I'll turn myself off when I'm not speaking. How's that, Katie? And thank you for the motion. Katie's doing it right, by the way, as far as I'm concerned, announcing her name and then doing whatever it is that you'd like to do. In her case, she made the motion to go to conduct this meeting by virtually. Is there a second?
I second it. Jeanette Russell from Manassas Park.
The second came from Jeanette Rochelle. So we have a motion on the floor. Is there any discussion? Seeing and hearing no discussion, I would ask that everyone, let's see, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Thank you for that. Are there any opposed? Since I only heard ayes and no opposition, we'll assume that motion passes unanimously, and we'll go on to back to item number 2, which is the summary minutes of the June 18th meeting. It's interesting. We haven't met for some time, as you know, and the meeting minutes that we have before us are June 18th. Is there any discussion and modifications, additions, etc.? And if not, is there a motion?
So moved. Jeanette Russell, Manassas Park.
Jeanette, thank you. Is there a second? Katie?
Sure, second, Katie Crystal.
Thank you for that. Jeanette Rochelle made the motion. Katie made the second to approve the minutes as they were in our packet for June 18th. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Was there opposition? No opposition. Okay, I'll assume that we passed those minutes unanimously. And
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be recorded as abstaining since I was absent at the meeting. Appreciate it.
We will make sure that happens. Thank you, Jeff. That moves us along to item number 4, which is the investment policy revisions. And I'll call on Mr. Longy while I'm mute.
Thank you, Mayor Parrish. We have first passed the investment policy in 2014. It's been revised twice. Both of those revisions occurred in 2019. The current proposed changes have been reviewed by the Council of Council. There's 9 objectives in the changes. The first is to add Fitch as a rating agency that we can use when making investment decisions. This was actually a legislative priority for the authority and the NOVA jurisdictions in the 2020 General Assembly session. So it's very fortuitous to be able to add this. The second change is adding the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, more commonly known as the World Bank. and the Asian development as well as African development bonds to our list of allowable investments. Those would come with a 36-month maximum maturity and be limited to only 15% of the portfolio. The World Bank actually has higher ratings than U.S. Treasuries at this point. Mayor Rochelle had asked a question. We would only buy the bonds that are unconditionally guaranteed. It's not tied to a specific development project in either of those areas. There's a number of additional code sections and state code updates. A lot of that was cleaned up so that we could stop attaching copies of each code section to the written policy and instead just insert links using that. It takes the policy length down by about 2/3. We are updating some of the policy language. Currently, the policy refers to a report called Treasurer's Accountability, which is now a GASB 40, and it refers to a treasurer, changing it to a CFO. It also adds in that the statement of economic interest needs to be filled out by both the CFO and the investment debt manager, which will come into play in a future action item or the next action item. It adds language to address security downgrades. Now, this is what happens if we buy a AAA security and it gets reduced to a single A. The 3 steps that would happen is that the Finance Committee will be notified at its next meeting that something in the portfolio is downgraded. And if the portfolio manager and myself have not already taken action, we will give the committee a plan for what to do with those securities. If there's a lag time between meetings, we may have already taken action. And typically the action would be to sell the securities. However, that may not always be the most prudent thing to do. A case would be if the securities were going to mature in 30 or 60 days, and if we sold them, we would encounter a market loss, then obviously we would just hold them to maturity. But if we haven't taken action on those securities, in addition to letting the committee know that they were downgraded, we would show either what we did or what we plan to do with them. We have a language to basically complete the process from going to manual paperwork to e-statements and e-confirmations. Every security transaction we do has an electronic confirmation now, and we're just incorporating those as being the baseline. And that was part of going to remote work as well. We had to put those processes in place. Extending the maturity period for qualified bonds issued by Virginia cities and counties. It's interesting to note, I think 7 jurisdictions in Northern Virginia have credit ratings that are, again, higher than the federal government's. So we want to increase the maturity period up to 5 years, because when a Fairfax County or Arlington go to market, they typically sell 20, 30-year bonds. Trying to get one that's just in that 3-year zone is pretty difficult. But in increasing the maturity, the next change is we will also decrease the maximum amount of holdings of those types of securities we can have in the portfolio. So there's kind of a risk trade-off there that balances that out. I'll be happy to take any questions. If the committee approves this today, then it would go to the authority at their October meeting.
Okay, very good. Mike, thank you for that. It seems certainly reasonable to me that Fitch gets added and the other issues that you spoke of, but there may be questions. Are there any questions? Okay, Mike did a good job. I do have one question, Mike, and my apologies for not asking it. Later on in the agenda package, there are multiple pages that have been lined out. Help me with that.
That is the Virginia code sections.
Okay, all right. Very good. All righty, so what you're looking for there is a recommendation from the Finance Committee to the authority for the next authorities meeting. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved, Jeanette Rushell from Manassas Park.
Thank you, Jeanette. Is there a second?
Chairman McKay says.
Thank you, sir. Jeanette made the motion. Mr. McKay seconded the motion to recommend to the authority the policy revisions to the investment policy. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing no discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Are there any nays? Okay, I think I hear a unanimous approval of the investment policy revisions and the recommendation for them. And that moves us along to item number 5, which is a conflict of interest policy revision. Very much looking for the approval for this and recommendation to the authority, but I'll call on Mr. Longy again for this item.
Thank you, Mayor. This item is basically has 5 purposes. The main one, quite frankly, is to move from having to do statement of economic interests twice a year to once a year. The categories in that statement are so broad, you pretty much have to make a big lottery winning in order for it to change in a 6-month period, even if you look at it over years. But while we were working with the Council of Counsel on making that change, we found that the policy itself was somewhat out of date and the wording was very awkward. So we also sought to update the procedures, make it clearer how we file those statements or the relevant staff members do. It notes that the executive director and the CFO will file a statement. As noted earlier, the investment and debt manager would as well. And we'll make notations on other staff members' position descriptions as to whether or not they have to file. The rewritten policy, and we're proposing a repeal and replace, because when you start doing change tracking on what we did with this thing, while the changes are just what I've outlined here, it looked like a bowl of spaghetti and it was impossible to track. But we do note that all authority employees will be required to read the Conflict of Interest Act. It's also referenced in our employee handbook. And then there's a procedure for notifying the authority chair that the executive director and the CFO have made their annual filing and keeping records of all that moving forward. And this also would go to the authority in October if you agree with it.
Right. Thank you, Mike, for bringing that forward. These are revisions to the conflict of interest policy. Are there any questions of Mike or Monica? Okay, seeing and hearing none, is there a motion to approve? Anyone?
Mr. Chair, this is Katie Crystal. I move to approve the new policies as outlined by our CFO.
Seconded by Jeanette Brischel.
Okay, very good. Katie made the motion. Jeanette seconded that motion to recommend approval to the authority with regard to the conflict of interest policy. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing no discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing no opposition, I'll assume that that's unanimous, and we'll move on to legislative services contract in just a moment. But I think I saw Delegate Rome. Delegate Rome, I believe you're with us now. It's good to have you. Welcome.
Hey, hi, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the kind welcome. I sent you a text right before the meeting started, just saying I'd be a couple minutes late. So thank you for accommodating.
My apologies. I do have my phone right next to me, but it's on mute, so I didn't hear anything going off. Anyway, thank you. Welcome. Again, back to our legislative services contract, a story to be told there by Mike Longy again.
Thank you, Mayor. Our current contract with McGuire Woods Consulting, I think more commonly known as Tracy Baynard, for legislative services during the General Assembly session and throughout the year, expires this fall, and we did do a competitive solicitation. We did only have one respondent, which was McGuire Woods Consulting, and they did propose that Tracy Baynard would continue to be our main point of contact. Since we only had one proposal, we are required to do a cost analysis. We did the cost analysis and found that the base amount at $75,000 a year was very competitive. We did negotiate a reduction in the annual escalation with McGuire Woods. Participating in the proposal review was Loudoun County, Gwen Kennedy, Arlington County, Pat Carroll, and Noel Dominguez from Fairfax County, as well as the executive director and myself. And with that, the staff recommendation is to adopt this contract.
Okay, very good. I know from my own perspective, I was appreciative of the fact that we went through the process, and even though there was only one applicant, we continued that process as per normal. And but my thought process is I have certainly appreciated Tracy Baynard's work. And I love to have smart people around me, and she's one of them. So I'm always appreciative of the work and the communication not only she provides to the authority members, but very closely with our staff. And so I'm thankful for that. Any discussion? Any thoughts about?
Mayor Parrish?
Yes, please.
This is Katie Crystal. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation, Mr. Longi. I too hold Ms. Baynard in very high regard. And so I hope this question doesn't imply doubt cast on her services, but I am very surprised there were no other bidders given the number of firms and even solo practitioners in this area. Mr. Longi, could you tell us a little about the process of advertising the RFP?
Sure. We most of all put it out on EVA, which is a statewide procurement distribution process. To use as an example, we also are running an economic analysis RFP, and we had 14 expressions of interest in that. I think the reason that only one firm applied is most often these services are not competitively bid. They're usually wrapped into legal advisory services, which the authority doesn't have the ability to do because we don't have in-house counsel, and we wouldn't be using it for just legal services alone. So I think a lot of times the firms are really kind of not used to bidding for the work. McGuire Woods Consulting, while there is a McGuire Woods law firm, the McGuire Woods Consulting is not a law firm. So they're probably a little bit more tuned in to going through this process. I think also, quite frankly, a lot of the legislative service providers maybe don't want to be aggressive in going after their counterparts because they work collaboratively down in Richmond, going after their counterparts' clients.
Could anyone else has questions to the same effect?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir, please.
I don't have a question, but for the purpose of further discussion, I'll go ahead and put a motion on. Move the Finance Committee recommend authority approval of the proposed legislative service agreement with McGuire Woods Consulting, LLC.
Second that motion, Jeanette Rischel.
Okay, very good. Jeff made Jeanette seconded that motion to approve the legislative service, or to recommend approval of the legislative services contract with McGuire Woods Group.
Parrish.
Any discussion?
Chairman Parrish, if it's appropriate for me to speak as a non-member of the committee,
Please.
I would also say that Tracy Baynard's relationships, particularly on transportation with the General Assembly, are very long-standing, so that her knowledge base, not only of individuals, but of related issues, makes her particularly valuable when she comes at least into my door.
It's very interesting. Delegate Watts, you are particularly knowledgeable in this area. We know, so thank you for that input. Katie, you might be interested to know that the question that you asked of Mike just moments ago is a question that I asked of him some days ago.
Great minds.
Yeah, it's a very, very astute question. We do have a motion on the table. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I'm going to assume from the fact that I heard only ayes and no noes that carries unanimously, and that is the end of our action items in our agenda. But we do have a number of items which I'm going to try to move us through quickly with regard to information and discussion. That leads us to item number 7, which is the Policy 29 Exception Report. Mr. Longy.
Thank you, Mayor Parrish. This report is coming up about annually, or that's the habit we've fallen into. Currently, the authority has 65 active SPAs, or standard project agreements, and 35 that are awaiting activation. That would occur when those projects receive an appropriation. We've completed 42 SPAs. So this report cycle started with sending out requests for information on 17 projects or 17 SPAs. 10 of those were able to document progress or allay concerns about being in exception status with the policy. If a project had been reported previously, as you'll see as we go into the details, its likelihood of being reported again was increased. In addition, this time around, we also looked at what projects were in fairly immediate range of being in an exception status. And we sent out a different 17 notices on that. While we never intended to report those, it was basically a courtesy to the project sponsors to let them know that if another month or so had gone by, they would have fallen into that category. And the good news, in addition to the 10 positive outcomes on the first 17, the second 17, we've actually seen a lot of progress with project sponsors making sure that they stay out of that exception zone. Project sponsors that did have exceptions and project sponsors that had warnings were all offered the opportunity to submit a de-appropriation request, which then would have moved the policy concern down a couple of fiscal years. So we have 7 projects that are on the list. The town of Herndon, East Eldon Street project. The town of Herndon previously, when we did our first report, had 3 projects that were noted. One, I believe, is finished. The other one is showing substantial progress. This is by far the largest of the 3, and it did not meet its progress goals that were reported to the committee last time. We did talk to the town, talk to VDOT, and in actuality, in June, VDOT started encountering expenditures on the project, which are one of the key indicators we have. They were not submitting those expenditures for reimbursement because their Appendix A and B were out of date, so they thought we wouldn't pay them. We did give them a one-time exemption to get that process moving while they organize their paperwork between the town and VDOT. So I think hopefully we won't see this one on the list again.
I'm sorry, everyone. That one's more a paperwork issue, trying to get through the administration of it. Is that it?
It is a paperwork issue, but it did miss its timelines.
Okay. All right.
The Leesburg Route 7 Battlefield Interchange is reported for the first time. Again, reimbursements were delayed significantly while the town and VDOT agreements were finalized. And it's important to note on this one, though, that VDOT actually used its own cash flow to keep the project moving. And so we're looking forward to that getting wrapped up and the project being in a compliant status.
Mike, help me with that. If expenditures are being made, what's the issue? I mean, if the project is moving forward, help me understand.
Well,
you indicated VDOT, for example, was using its own cash flow to accomplish the project, so the project's moving forward.
We're very concerned about the amount of forward appropriation and forward funding on this project relative to what we saw as a normal project completion schedule. This project has been, the authorities funding most of it, I think approximately $58 million. And the town put itself under a very aggressive schedule to get through design and into construction. Fairfax County has 5 projects, 1 new, 4 are repeats, and they're listed on the attached table. The table also shows a response for all of the project sponsors in there. 2 of the county projects are related to Innovation Metro Station, and we would really just kind of like to see the last of the billing amounts cleared out for those so that we can close them out. One project, Fairfax County Parkway, has a delay in pulling funds since June of 17, but right behind it, it has 2 more appropriations. So obviously you can see kind of the sequence there isn't working out real well. And it is my understanding the projects are moving and it's using other funding sources. But you know, as I mentioned, if we could deappropriate some funds, especially when we start talking about investments, it allows us to take a longer maturity line, especially in this market for investments, and just kind of keeps the cash flow perspective on our side a lot cleaner.
Okay, so not an action item, right, Mike?
I'm sorry?
Not an action
Not an action
item.
item. And there's no, yes, there's no recommended action on these. It's just, we'll watch it moving forward.
Okay, all right. Any questions, anyone with regard to Mike, anything else on that one? Okay, very good. That leads us then to finance activities report, item number 8.
Thank you, Mayor. This report is intended to give the committee an update of some of the things that the finance team is working on. The reimbursement parameter study, which if I think for the newer committee members, we have been looking at overhead rates being submitted for reimbursements that were in excess of 100% or in the high 80s. And we've been working with the jurisdictions to kind of redefine what is eligible for project reimbursement, come up with some better definitions of it. At the same time, we want something that's flexible enough that can adjust to unique project needs. What works for a bus purchase obviously isn't going to work for a large bridge or something like that. So we've been working through that. I'm happy to report that we do have a lot of progress. But the regional project sponsors have asked for kind of a workshop approach because most of our dialogue has been with the planning side of the project sponsors, and they want us to have a closer dialogue with the financial side. So we're hoping to do that in October. I can already tell you where I think the big sticking point is. There are some agencies and jurisdictions that have given their transportation departments a broader, shall I say, general fund sponsored budget. And those jurisdictions typically are submitting overhead rates in the 30%. And our external research kind of validates that that's solid. However, other jurisdictions have not given their transportation departments as much general fund support. And therefore, they're putting that on the project. And those type of expenditures are the ones that are kind of giving us some angst as we work through it, giving staff angst. Because if one jurisdiction is not charging us for office space, but another one is, and when I say office space, I'm talking about office space at an overhead level for a facility that they may have owned for 20 or 30 years. But another jurisdiction is, then it looks that some of those expenses are basically supplanting ongoing operating expenses. So we're still working through it. We're trying to get a compromise where everybody's on the same playing field. Those that aren't charging overhead at all, and there are a number of jurisdictions that are not charging any overhead, get a more level playing field, maybe they start charging some. The jurisdictions that are trying to throw everything in the kitchen sink, rhetorically, may have to ratchet back some of theirs. And they may have to use some of their 30% if they're general fund support. So we're really trying to look for transparency and equity, and of course, obeying the statutes that these funds not be used to supplant ongoing expenditures.
Well, it's interesting. I know that you've reported through the Finance Committee previously that the staff is trying to work on that effort to come to a conclusion on that. You're still working.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mayor Parrish, this is Mary Hines. I just have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
Mike, can you talk a little bit about what our enabling legislation says about supplanting or other, supplanting costs as it applies to this?
The legislation doesn't get into detail in it. I mean, it doesn't say what expenses are valid and which ones aren't. However, if you look at what we have to go through for the 30% annual certification and other things that are embedded in the legislation, it appears that the General Assembly said this money's to be used to bring projects forward, not to cover ongoing operational expenses. And so, some of the topics that we've seen, one of the big ones is if a jurisdiction or an agency opted to not make their annual required contribution to their pension plan, a project today should not be paying for that expense or that decision several years ago. Likewise, if a vehicle needs a new head gasket, just because that vehicle is sometimes assigned to the authority, I mean, we're talking a pickup truck, the authority shouldn't have to pay for that major engine repair. I mean, we even get down to that level of granularity on some of these. So
I appreciate that. It certainly has come up in other things that I'm doing at the CTB too. The issue has arisen, and the commissioner actually said that they might talk about it at our next meeting. So I don't know if you've had any conversation with the state level VDOT about what they're finding, but it might be helpful.
Well, I do know the parameter study has concerns for the local VDOT, the regional VDOT folks, and they have been talking to the state.
But the CTB members have many of the same concerns that MVTA members have. So, so we'll see how it plays out.
And if I could, Ms. Hines, I talked to the commissioner, it seems like a lifetime ago, who was pre-COVID, but earlier this year. So I will circle back with him because we're trying to make sure we're accounting for equity, because we have some localities that don't charge anything in regards to those costs. And then we're seeing invoices over 100%. So we're trying to find a compromise, if you will. We're not saying that the authority should pay zero towards those costs, but we are trying to find a compromise in which everyone could live with. And even the attorneys think that they could defend if we're questioned about it, or challenged, I should say.
I think that last point is real important, that we feel that we're in a defensible position.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mike. Any other thoughts? Of course, let me know.
Okay. I did want to report the annual audit appears to be going very smoothly. We had to transition from partially digital records to fully digital records, and Peggy Teal has been doing a humongous amount of work along with support from Dev, while at the same time Dev was acting board clerk to get through this audit cycle. I'll let Peggy, if she's available, come online and give some details as to where we are.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to let you know that we were able to conduct our audit completely electronically, which I can say is the first time in my career, my long career, that I've ever been involved in an audit that was conducted remotely. It went fairly smoothly. I'd say it was a little more bumps than we normally experience, but it was only because we are scanning documents and then forwarding them, uploading them to the auditor's FTP site. But that was really the only hiccup we ran into. Even though we moved from being a majority of paper-driven organization to an electronic organization, we were lucky that we put in place the right checks and balances and internal controls so that we didn't have any questions or any problems in our internal control area. All of our information is stored on a cloud, and we do our approvals through the Adobe e-sign, so all the signatures are certified. We have all the jurisdictions submit their documentation to us the same way. The auditors were very happy with the results. They have not found or mentioned any comments or findings during the audit.
Okay, so that sounds outstanding to me. Keep going, Mike.
To the best of our knowledge, the auditors have not reported any findings or any non-routine recommendations at this point. So we're hoping to have another very clean audit. I just wanted to let the committee know that in addition to the legislative services, we issued an RFP for the economic analysis. We had 14 expressions of interest. 4 of those turned into proposals, and we're doing the proposal interviews, hopefully wrapping them up tomorrow, actually. So we'll be back to the committee in October with a recommendation. Local distribution and regional revenue fund policies. As you know, there were a number of changes in the 2020 General Assembly. We've not brought policies forward to the committee to effectuate those changes. We're waiting for the conclusion of the special session. Revenue funding, project funding summary. If you turn to page 2, or run your mouse over to page 2, I guess is the way of saying it these days. We have a report here that has its genesis in the work that Peggy does for the financial statements. And I was looking at, number one, the amount of effort she puts into that. That report, if you remember, a couple of years ago, we started presenting this non-standard financial statement that tracks the project spend outs and project allocations as a way to present within our financial statements a contra to the large balance sheet that we have, so that a reader of the financial statement can see, yes, there's a lot of cash being held by the authority, but then at the same time, they can look at and see these future liabilities, which are the adopted or appropriated projects. Taking an offshoot of that, I thought it would be very helpful to try and take some of this information and make it a little bit more visible, number one, and easier for folks to understand. So we put together this table. And what this table does is it shows in the first column on the left, it shows the jurisdiction. Then it shows the local distributions from 2014, when we started, the 30%, to the last closed out fiscal year, which was 2020. And so you can see, just taking off the top of that, Alexandria got 43 million and 30% funding. Arlington's received almost 74 million, and so on down the line. Working across, we then took all of the project funding that has been approved. So the local distribution column is 7 years. The regional revenue fund column, 70%, goes out to 2025, so that's 12 years. But that shows the actions that the authority has taken. So in there, City of Alexandria at the top got 177 million in projects for a total between 30 and 70 of $220 million. Working down for the cities and counties without a town, it's pretty easy to read. Jumping down to Fairfax, just for clarity, the Fairfax in total received 268 million in 30%. But when you take the allocations to the town of Herndon and Vienna, the county itself kept 257. The 2 towns got those amounts, and then the same for the 70%. So if you look at Fairfax County's total, the county, including the towns, has gotten 1.2 billion. Herndon, 18 million, and Vienna, 6 million. So the county total itself was just under that 1.2 billion. Moving further down the table, we have other funding recipients as well. These are typically projects that we can't really designate very easily, at least on a financial basis, to a particular jurisdiction. So NBTC received $838 million, VRE. I'm sorry, 838,000. Thank you, Monica. Sorry, board member Cristal. VRE 63 million and so on. We did footnote that WMATA, in addition to 2 projects, has gotten other associated funding that we were able to tie to a jurisdiction, the Innovation Station in Fairfax, Potomac Yard Station in city of Alexandria. So that total is 126 million. And if you look at the summary, the authority in total has processed out 620 million and 30%. Project assignments are a little over 2.5 billion for a total of over 3.1 billion. And we just thought that this would be kind of a helpful thing for jurisdictions and the board members especially to have in their hands.
Well, those numbers are outstanding. I don't know that I've looked back and thought about the dollars that the MBTA has been able to do something with, and over $3 billion in that time frame is a really good number. We need to continue and do the work of our citizens. Mike and Monica, could you make sure that we send this to, if you haven't already, send this to the chair, Chair Randall, just so she'll have it? Mm-hmm. I mean, she'll get it when we bring it up at the authority meeting, but she might like to have it.
Yeah. Also attached to this report is the detailed project listing that shows the project's approved funding level. If a project is complete, it shows that it's got no outstanding appropriations. It also shows a percentage of drawdown by project, so you can see the current status. And the amount of funds not drawn down. The caveat on that is, obviously, if a project can be in this list and doesn't have an appropriation yet, so we didn't include it in that not drawn down percentage. Likewise, we didn't include projects that had a FY21 appropriation because, one wouldn't expect them to be making substantial drawdowns yet.
That's a very interesting report, Mike, about financial activity. Any thoughts, any questions?
I have a question.
Yes. Who was that? I know I heard Jeanette.
Okay,
Jeanette?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just puzzled. Phase 1 location study for our VRE garage is not listed on the regional revenue, and I thought that was a regional revenue project. I beg your pardon?
With VRE.
I see, thank you.
Okay, any other thoughts? Again, very interesting information. Okay, very good.
Okay.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mike. That leads us to number 9, the investment portfolio report. And we'll call on Mr. Longy, who has the all of this stuff today. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. On the investment portfolio, I think everybody's been watching the news. We know the federal government is taking a lot of action to kind of keep the economy going and stimulate it. That has a direct bearing on our portfolio. I'll just go through the tables really quick in the report. The first table shows that we still have a very well-diversified portfolio. We've got our investment holdings spread across a number of qualified categories. That diversity is going to be harder to maintain, though, as the market goes in the direction that it is going. Corporations are not issuing corporate notes or commercial paper because, quite frankly, they don't have to. They can get the money almost directly from the feds. So they don't have to go to the market, which denies us opportunities to purchase investments. Moving to the next table, if you look down at the bottom section, you see that the golden color bar is growing substantially. I'll talk about this a little bit further, but we are increasing the liquidity of the portfolio, mostly because it doesn't make sense to invest in the long term at this point, or at least up until yesterday when the Fed said they're going to keep the rates low for 3 years. With that data point, I think in the latter part of October, beginning part of November, we will start buying treasuries and agencies, and we'll just have to live with that low rate of return. Our portfolio, since we will not increase risk in order to keep yield going, is going to reflect that short-term market reality. If you look down at the small table that shows our benchmarks, we are still doing very good against our benchmarks. We're performing very well. And basically, the strategy that we're employing right now is called rolling down the yield curve. We're trying to hold on to as many of our instruments as we can. Many of them are getting called out from underneath us because the issuers can just refinance those instruments and get a lower rate for themselves. As a comparison, right now, LGIP and our bank holdings are paying about 2.6 and 2.8, or I'm sorry, 0.26 and 0.28 respectively. And treasuries today are selling at about 0.12. So we have substantial holdings in money market accounts at our banks, and we have substantial holdings at LGIP. And so at some point, those funds are going to get close to treasury yields, and that's when we'll start actually buying treasuries and agencies. The blue table that graphically shows our performance, you can see our 0.77. We are trending down with the market, but we are not at the market level yet. But ultimately, we are going to land there. So to kind of recap our strategy, we're holding on to our maturities. We're going to ride the bank's yield, and we're going to ride the LGIP yield. I suspect probably early fall, mid-fall, those are going to kind of close in together, and then we'll go into a process of buying treasuries and agencies. We did buy a treasury and agency floater today, which is a protection against zero interest rates. It will at least always give us 6 basis points above whatever the 90-day T-bill is paying. And with that, I'll be happy to respond to any questions. It's obviously a challenging market.
Allie, your sound has gone out. We can't hear you. Nope. Nope.
Near Parish here, we can't hear you. No.
As Mike called it just a moment ago, Mike and I are going to tag team since my computer seems to be malfunctioning in some way, shape, or form. Obviously, the malfunction is probably me, but nevertheless, are there any questions with regard to the investment portfolio report? Seeing and hearing none. Mike, can we move on to the monthly revenue report?
I'm going to just do the next two.
Please.
We will do the next two items in sequence, and we will, I'll briefly recap them. The monthly revenue report that's included with the package basically closes out the last fiscal year, fiscal 20. We did come in a little bit above estimate, which was somewhat surprising. When you go back and look at our revenue estimations, we had built our revenue estimates around a reduction in GDP. And it turns out on a national basis, we came within less than 0.25% of what actually happened. What we're looking at, and this is good news, is that while we took that national GDP, we converted it to a regional GDP. And I think to just sum it up very quickly, Northern Virginia in sales tax has shown to be much, much more resilient than the state as a whole, as well as the nation as a whole. So while we're not recommending any changes to the revenue estimates for moving forward, because we are kind of still looking for that second V, hopefully it doesn't happen, but the estimates are prepared for it to happen. We are, I just would say, we're not in as bad a place as we thought we would be at this point, which is good news. Moving on to the monthly operating budget, we closed out our fiscal year ahead. We actually, the COVID experience has had us saving money, even though we had to buy some more software applications and make greater investment in cell phone service and stuff like that. We actually were able to save money on the operating budget side. With that, Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you.
Apologies again for the technical challenges, everyone. Are there any questions or thoughts with regard to the last two items or with regard to anything on the agenda today? Seeing and hearing none, we're going to adjourn very quickly, but let me thank you for bearing with me with regard to the technology issue. Thanks for spending your time with the Finance Committee and staff today. And we look forward to getting together. Mike, will we be meeting next month?
Yes, Monica has some.
Okay, Ms. Backman.
Thank you, Mayor Parrish, and Board Member Crystal, thank you for reminding me of this. Margaret Duper is back. Margaret, and I meant to tell you guys in June because we got the packet out. Margaret went to the hospital. I asked her how are things going, and she ended up having a baby. So Margaret and Dylan are doing well. Monday was Margaret's first day back, so we're glad to see her.
Welcome back. Congratulations.
Thank you, everyone.
Monica, anything else? No, that's it. Mike, anything else? Anything else from the committee members? Okay, very good. Thank you again, everyone. We're adjourned.
Thank you, sir.